So yeah, I guess we can start now. So thank you, everyone, for joining. See a lot of people here. So first, I need to ask one questions. Who is Brazilian here? So yeah, today I'm going to talk about how you can enhance database observability with OpenTelemetry. So to start, let me introduce myself. My name is Marylia Gutierrez. I am a staff software engineer at Grafana Labs, focusing on OpenTelemetry. And within OpenTelemetry, I work in a couple of different groups. I am a maintainer for the contributor experience. So if you want to become a contributor to OpenTelemetry and you have any challenges and you have some feedback, I'm happy to hear and improve your experience. I'm also a approver for the JavaScript SDK, the database semantic conventions, which is something I'm going to talk about today, and also for the Portuguese localization. So to start talking about the database observability, I want to give you a little context of what is information that we are collecting, where this is coming from. So now you know, if you want to give your opinion as well, make changes, you know exactly which point do you want to start. So everything here starts with semantic conventions. So what is exactly semantic conventions? This is like the long definitions that we have on our documentation. But what it basically is saying is that this is the place that we're going to define things like what are the span names, what are the metric names, and why this is important. I can give two reasons. So the first one is because we define what is the same thing for everybody, now we have the same baseline. So now everybody that we talk about spans, we know, everybody knows what should be a span, and so on. And the other case is, imagine somebody say like, oh, I want to instrument for databases. And then they go to the JavaScript SDK, and then create a metric, call it statement duration. Then someone on the Java SDK say, oh, I want to create something too. And they call it query time. So now you have two different names to mean the same thing. And now when somebody want to use those SDKs, they have to learn the two different names for the things that are supposed to be the same. And then when you are sending this to your observability vendor, what you do is now you have two different names that you cannot easily combine. You can still combine, but it's not so straightforward. So now when we define, is a little more easy than everybody's on the same page. So how the creation of semantic convention works? So the first step is decide what should exist. So people say, we should have a convention for databases. And everybody like, yeah, cool, agree. I think that step is very straightforward and easy. People agree very easily. And then the next step is something that engineers are very well known to do very fast, which is deciding names. We're very fast in doing that, right? And just definition, which sounds a little more like this. So why it looks like this is because, OK, let's use the example of the database. So we want to define things that, what are my attributes for my statement? Sorry, not statement, I meant query. No, not query. Operation, yes. I'm going to use attributes for my operation. And one of them, for sure, should be table, right? Yeah, but not all databases have table or have schemas. What do you do with the NoSQL? So you want to create something that works for all databases. And not even going to talk about vector databases or graph databases. Then it just became a lot more things. So if you think about it, when we create a convention, we want to make sure that works for all databases and all the languages, so that takes time. Because you might think like, oh, this is going to work. Let's create a prototype. And then like, oh, wait, on JavaScript, this event does not exist at all. OK, let's go back to the convention, rename, create a new definition, and going back. So that is why if you might ask, like, why things are not stable yet, this is one of the reasons things just take time. But we also have some that are really like straightforward to make our life easier, like return rows. It's just a number. You run a query, and you have the number. OK, but what about the case you actually have 1 billion rows that are returned? You're not really returning the 1 billion rows. You are returning a few, and you kind of like iterate on your codes, and you keep doing like the next, and imagine that you stop at some point. So what is the number that you want to return? Do you want to return the 1 billion that's supposed to be returned that is on your buffer? Or you stop at whatever the person stopped on their next iteration? And if we decide that, do we even have an event for that? So now you can see how this takes a year or years to define things. Now, let's talk about specific the database semantic conventions. So, first things, some good news here that I want to share. Just 2 days ago, we marked it as a release candidate 2 for the version we just released. So that means for the next release that is coming out the end of the month, we are marking the database conventions as stable. So yay, we got there. And what are the things that are defined on that convention? It's kind of like 3 groups. So the first one is the client spans. The second one are the metrics, and the third one I'm calling here like specific, because even like we really try to say something that is going to encapsulate everybody. We still have a few cases that has to have some exceptions, or maybe some particular databases have some attributes that are only for that database. So you want to make sure that they're also added here. And here we also have some simple things, like for example, we have a lot of databases that are compatible with Postgres. So we want to tell like just username Postgres for the ones that are compatible. You don't need to create one for each type. But here is just not this definition of name. We have a lot of things here as well. So here we have to define how we collect those metrics, the units, and if we are doing things like sanitization, how you do the sanitization. If you're going to create a query summary, what you have to be this, how you group things. So we don't want to make any questions for people that are instrumenting. They know what to expect when they come here. So this is why it also becomes a very long document. So now let's take a look at what we have today. So for the span, which is part of the release candidates, we have name, status, some common attributes, explaining how to do the sanitization, and also how to generate a query summary. If you're curious, this is the list of all the attributes that we have. We have 15 today. It's mostly about like the name of things, the operation, and some of them you're not going to set up on all cases. For example, error type, you're only setting if there's actually an error on the execution. Then we have the metrics, which is currently on a mixed state, because we have for the database operation, it is a release candidate, and for the database response and connection pools, we are currently developing. Those two are more new that we are working on. And if you're curious, this is also the list of the attributes for the database operation. Now, let's go over an example here. So for this example, I'm using an application that is, the front end is using React. The back end is in Node. So the back end is the part I'm going to instrument today for this example. And the database that I'm using here is Postgres. So my front end is a very simple application. It's just listing users. You have the option to refresh, remove, and add new user. Very simple here. For the backend, I have mostly 2 files. So the first one is making the calls to the database. So looking at the first here, let's zoom in, is just making the call to your database. And I change here. I do not use admin, very safe. But yeah, I'm using localhost, so we are good here. And here's just the function to connect to my database. And then I have my other function that I'm doing something, which is just a get user, which is my select. And then we have the add user, that is just doing the insert. And then the remove user, that is just the delete. So here for my example, this is where my application kind of stops here. And then I have also my routes, my API to the front end can connect. So I have here my get, so also zooming in. This is just making the call for that function that I showed before. So my front end can call this endpoint. And I have my 2 posts, that is one for adding the user and one for removing the user. So if you have your application, this is where your application would be. You don't have to add any of this. This is whatever you have today. So now the next point is actually adding the instrumentation to this. So how do you do this? So for my Node example, you're going to install some dependencies. So here I'm going to use auto instrumentation because it already initialized a bunch of things for me, so it makes my life easier. And the last one that we have here is specific for the Postgres because that is the database that I'm using for this example. Now I'm going to go to create a new file that is just my instrumentation. I have a bunch of imports, but I can zoom in on the part that you actually initialize the SDK. For this example here, I'm actually exporting to backend observability backend here. But if you want to just test it out, you can actually use just like console exporter that would just like print for you on your terminal so you can check it out what it's sending. And to initialize, as I mentioned, I'm using the auto instrumentation and my Postgres instrumentation. The next thing that I'm going to do is just set up some environment variables. So because what I did so far is I'm collecting those metrics, those spans, but I need to send them somewhere. So I just need to say, like, what is the protocol that I'm using? What is my endpoint? So here I'm sending to my Grafana instance. I'm putting my token to connect to it. And something that we really recommend using is setting up the service name. So this is going to make your life easier later if you want to check it out, like filter out by specific service. You have a lot of things running, so you can separate between them. And then I'm going to initialize my application that previously I was just doing like node index. Now I just add this required and the new file that I created. Now I go back to my UI, click all over, add a few more awesome women in science to my list. I can remove a few. And then I'm going to go back to my observability vendor to check where this data is coming from. So here, I filter out by that service name, and I'm checking one of my get users, and it's going to have a list here of the traces. So here, I'm going to have like the trace ID, like the start time, my service, and then if I click on one of those traces, you're going to see all the spans that were part of that trace. And the one that I want to call out attention is those two last ones, which is my information that I got from the database. So I have here how long it took to do the connect itself with creating the pool, and I have for my statement here, for this case, I'm looking at the select on my database. And then if I click on any of those spans, I can see their attributes. So here I'm going to have like the connection string, the database name, and so on. And you can see like that list from 15 doesn't show all of them. Some things might not make sense for all of them. So a lot of them are recommended, not required. Then I'm jumping a lot more. So the next one that I want to show is the metrics. So here I'm showing for the operation duration. And the cool thing is that, OK, I'm seeing here how long all of my calls to the database were taking. But because I have those attributes, I can do things like breaking down. And this is what this one is doing. So I'm breaking down here by the type of operation. So I have my select, my insert, and my deletes. And for here, I can see how long different types have taken. And you can notice here that my insert and my deletes are taking longer than my selects, which on my case makes sense because I have a very small table that I'm just doing like a simple select. And my inserts and deletes are actually making changes on the table. But that might not be the case for a lot of applications. And what are the other type of things that you can do with this information? Here, I'm going to give an example just getting based on the duration itself. You can test it out new types of indexes. Imagine you create new index for your table, and you want to make sure that it was efficient or not. So now you can compare before you change it and after your change. The same thing, you might be testing different type of database. Which one makes more sense for your application? Then you can compare even like with the price that they're giving you, compare with the performance. Again, so you can have one service name for each database and then compare. If you want to use ORMs, which used to give me a lot of headaches in the past because they create some really monstrosity queries that you have to deal with them. Doing sanitization for those are awesome. But then if you really want to use, you can also compare with them. And even like for yourself, like you're creating queries and want to make sure that the ones that you're creating are good ones, and then you can compare making difference. So just with like the example for the duration, these are all the things that you can compare. Imagine like more attributes you add, more breakdown you can do. So it's just like happiness from now on, and more observability you're going to have on your system, more things you can do on top of that, and potentially improve like any price that you're using today of your costs because you are improving the performance of your entire application. One thing that I want to make it clear, I know some people have concerns like, wait, are you actually seeing the data on my database, on my privacy? So the instrumentation is not looking at the data of your database, it's looking at the action that it's doing. So for example, it's looking at the API the Postgres uses. So how long it takes, how many like rows got returned, and things like that. It's not seeing your database, like your data on your database, so that continues private. But please make sure that, I know that people like to add extra attributes to things. Don't be yourself adding like attribute password 123, like please don't do that. Make sure that your things that you're adding as attributes make sense to be there. But from the instrumentation side, we are not looking at any of your data itself. Now you're like, okay, cool, I want to use. Is this ready to use? So for the span, the majority of things are already like in place, so you can start using today. For the metrics itself, they are currently under development. So we have today, for the operation duration that I mentioned, for the Java, we had, I think for all of the drivers are already there. For the JavaScript, we have for Postgres, and for .NET, we have for the SQL clients. So what is next? So people from the Semantic Commission group is working on, as I mentioned, like stabilize. So hopefully by the end of the month, it would be stable. And then we're going to continue working on instrumenting on all of other languages, all database, because as you can imagine, there's a lot of things still out there that we want to add. So we're going to continue working on that. And how can you help? So start using the existing implementations. Give us feedback if the things are there are the things that you wanted. And even feedback for the semantic convention itself, because since it exists a lot of databases, we might not know some edge cases for your particular database that might not work for this scenario, so we were happy to hear. And also, if you want to be a contributor and help us out with all the languages and databases that are out there, we are also happy to help. And even me, as my other hat of the contributor experience, I can also help with that if there's something that you are having trouble with. And here, just putting some resources if you're curious about the semantic convention itself. The first one is the link for that, if you want to see the big list. And the second one is just the sample code for this application. Just keep in mind, it's a very simple application that I'm just putting instrumentation on. And I'm going to leave it on to the rest, so no rush. And yeah, thanks for listening. That's my talk for today. Ooh. And yeah, I think we have about 5 minutes for questions, if anyone have questions. Otherwise, you have some time back. Cool. All good. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Oh, we have one? Oh, I think you're supposed to go to the mic there, because then other people can. OK. What do you mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is like more focused on like the instrumentation itself is going to collect some of those basic things, just for the others to know the context that I'm talking about here. He's also asking about like anything like after you do the instrumentation and concern like injections and things like that. So that would be more on the people instrumented if they want to add something. Like the SDK itself is just collecting those things that I mentioned. And then you can send to your collector to do extra things that you want there, or you can send directly to your like observability vendor to see the data there. But anything extra that you want to add is not the instrumentation like already like created by us that would be doing. You could be adding anything that you want on top of that. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so the question was about hiding attributes. So there are like two things here. If you're talking about, like, for example, the attributes of the span, I think then you will not send directly, for example, to your backend vendor. You would send to a collector. And on the collector itself, you could do things with your span. If you're talking about like the attributes of the query itself, so that is the part that we talk about sanitization. So we want to make sure that no actual data is being sent at any point. So that is one of the concerns. So if we have, for example, the JavaScript, I can give an example. You have two ways of executing a query. You can just put the query with the arguments on it, or you can pass it on like the query and then the argument separate. If you do that, we like remove that list and just use that as the query. If you are sending everything there, we don't send at all because we are concerned that might have like privacy data there. One thing that we are working on is we're going to create like some config options that then you can opt in and say, no, I really want to send the data. I know the risks, and I'm not sending anything that I really care about the privacy like on this. So you can send the query as is.
And when I want to make the parameter or the data I put into the query or operation, make it visible, need I create an extra attribute for this to filter all these stuff?
No, so by default, it's going to sanitize for you. Like, it's always going to try to hide. That is the default instrumentation, not send confidential information. And if you want to send, then you have to opt in to send. But it's not, we're not at the point of the opt-in yet. At this point, we're just like, nope, not sending. Yeah. Cool. Ooh, one more. Well, since you're next to the mic, using, cool.
So my question revolves around like different kind of a metric, for example, ingestion metrics such as, let's say, LSN lags, replication lags. Is it possible to expose specifically for Postgres in MySQL, it will be binary logs and things like that. So would it be possible down the line, because that is also sometimes utilized in custom implementation where you're streaming data from one database to another or having a master-slave copy kind of a thing?
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, I see what you mean. So for now, we focus more like, for example, what is happening inside the database, not like after leave your database going to another place. I guess depending on what you're using, maybe another semantic convention might be the right thing for you, because we have like semantic for like HTTP calls and gRPC. We are starting with the RPC now. So maybe like this connection between things is something then you would be able to add like the delays and lags between those two things. If you're interested on the RPC, we're about to start that. When we finish the database, we're going to start on the RPC one. So that is something we are happy to have feedback on. Good. OK, cool. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining.